The chamber trio stopped in the middle of a song. 1 second, the Harbor City Maritime Museum atrium was all glass walls, waterfront lights, and donors lifting champagne beneath suspended ship lanterns. The next, every eye had turned toward me. Grant stood near the center of the floor in his tailored charcoal suit, one arm around Leela Voss. She looked exactly as polished as the world expected her to look. Long dark hair, camera-ready makeup, a silk dress that caught every light in the room, and a phone held up at chest level, recording. I saw the screen before I understood what was happening. My own face was in it, teal gown, frozen smile. A woman who had come to a charity gala believing she was attending it with her husband. Then Grant held out a thick envelope. "Simone," he said, loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "you've been served." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because I didn't know our marriage had been fraying. I did. I had felt Grant pulling away in 100 small dismissals. 100 nights when his phone mattered more than my voice. But this, at a gala, in front of strangers, with Leela filming it for Pullstream. I looked at the envelope in his hand. Dissolution petition stamped across the front. My name beside his. 12 years of marriage reduced to papers he had decided to make into a performance. A woman near the bar covered her mouth. Someone else lifted a phone. Then another. Grant's jaw tightened as if he had rehearsed this moment and needed me to play my part. Break down. Beg. Make Lila's video worth posting. Instead, I took the envelope. My fingers were steady. That surprised me most. Leela leaned into him, smiling toward her screen. "People deserve the truth," she said softly. The truth was that my husband had not merely left me. He had brought an audience. He had brought a camera. And as the music died completely around us, I understood that Grant and Leela had planned every cruel second of it. Grant did not stop at the papers. Of course he didn't. He watched me hold that envelope and mistook my silence for weakness. Then he began explaining himself to the room like he was the injured party. "I can't keep carrying someone who doesn't want more," he said. "Simone's comfortable staying small. I'm building something with Leela." Lila's phone stayed raised. Her face softened into a practiced expression of sympathy, but her eyes moved over me with calculation. She was not looking at a heartbroken wife. She was looking at an obstacle between Grant and whatever she believed he could take from me. Grant continued, "The house, the savings, retirement accounts, we'll sort it out. And the money your grandmother left you, we'll need to discuss that too." For 1 second, the atrium blurred. My grandmother Odessa's bequest. $275,000 she had left specifically for me. Money Grant had always dismissed as a modest family cushion, never bothering to ask what I had done with it, never bothering to notice that I had been building a life beyond the narrow little role he assigned me. "I need capital for Keller Voss," he said, as if he were discussing a shared dream. "Leela and I have real plans." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Their phones were still up. The humiliation was spreading in real time. Little red recording lights blinking from every corner of the room. My best friend Tessa pushed through the crowd and came to my side. Her bold glasses caught the atrium light as she stared at Grant with open disgust. "You are doing this here?" she asked. Grant barely looked at her. "This is between Simone and me." No, I thought. This was a show, and he had invited the whole city. I looked at Lila's screen, then at Grant's expensive watch. His smug expression, his arms still locked around the woman he had chosen to parade before me. He expected tears. He expected a scene. He expected me to fight for a man who had just announced, publicly, that my value depended on what he could extract from me. So I lifted my chin and asked, "Are you finished?" The smile fell from Lila's face. Grant blinked. "Simone, are you finished?" I repeated. Then I handed the papers to Tessa long enough to straighten the shoulders of my gown. "I'll respond through counsel," I said, "not through your camera." I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard whispers. Heard Grant call my name. Heard Leela say something sharp and urgent. But I did not look back. Dignity is not pretending something does not hurt. It is refusing to let people who hurt you choreograph your collapse. The moment the museum doors closed behind us, I stopped breathing like I had been holding myself together with thread. The cold Harbor City air hit my face. Waterfront wind moved through my coils. Somewhere inside, the gala had resumed in fractured pieces, but outside, the night was quiet except for traffic and the sound of my phone vibrating inside my clutch. Once, twice, again and again, Tessa guided me toward her car without saying a word. She knew better than to fill pain with noise. I still had the dissolution petition in my hand. The edges had bent under my grip. I can't open it. I whispered, "You don't have to open it tonight." She said. My screen lit up again. Messages from coworkers, missed calls from family, notifications from Pullstream. The video was already moving through Harbor City, carrying the worst moment of my marriage into people's bedrooms and group chats and breakfast conversations I would never be part of. I wanted to throw the phone into the harbor. I wanted to go back inside and ask Grant how he could look at me for 12 years, know my heart, know my family, and still decide I deserve that kind of cruelty. But grief does not always arrive as tears. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, a body too shocked to understand what has been taken from it. Tessa opened the passenger door. "Tonight, you get through tonight," she said. "Tomorrow, we deal with every page." I looked down at the unopened envelope. My marriage was over. That much was already clear, but I would not let Grant decide the hour I had to face the wreckage. I got into the car, set the papers in my lap, and turned my phone face down. Tomorrow, I would read what he thought he was entitled to. Tomorrow, I would call Evan. Tonight, I was allowed to survive. By morning, the video had spread everywhere. I sat at the kitchen table in the Bayview house wearing denim and a mustard cardigan, staring at my phone while cold coffee sat untouched beside me. Leela had posted the clip to Pullstream before the gala was even over. There I was, standing beneath museum lights while Grant served me divorce papers. The caption talked about truth, courage, and choosing a life that matched your ambition. Thousands of views, comments from people who knew nothing about my marriage. People praising Leela for being brave, people calling Grant honest. People asking why I looked so calm, as if composure during public humiliation were something suspicious. My phone kept buzzing. My mother had called 6 times. Co-workers from Harbor Youth had sent messages telling me not to worry about work. Strangers had found my account. Grant had sent 3 messages that began with, "We need to be adults about this." I did not answer any of them. Tess arrived with breakfast, a paper bag, and the kind of expression that told me she was 1 post away from driving to Lila's apartment herself. "You need to eat," she said, placing a sandwich in front of me. "I don't think I can. You can take 1 bite. We'll build from there." That was Tessa. No speeches, just practical love. I opened the dissolution petition at last. The pages felt heavier in daylight. Grant's demands were written in clean legal language, but I could hear his voice underneath every sentence. Mine, mine, mine. My hand started shaking, so I reached for the number I had saved years earlier. Evan Mercer answered on the second ring. "Simone." His voice was calm, direct. "I saw enough online to know you shouldn't be dealing with this alone." The knot in my throat tightened. "I need you to look at these papers," I said. "Today, I'll come to the house. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to Grant directly. Save every message, every post, every screenshot." For the first time since the museum, I felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but structure. The spectacle had been public. The damage was real. And now it was no longer something I had to carry by myself. Tessa sat across from me as I took my first bite of breakfast. Then we waited for Evan to arrive. Evan arrived with a leather briefcase, a crisp blue shirt, and the steady expression of someone who did not confuse outrage with strategy. He read Grant's petition once without speaking. Then he read it again. Tessa paced behind him, arms crossed so tightly I thought she might snap in half. Finally, Evan set the papers down. "Grant is seeking half the equity in the Bayview house," he said, "half the joint savings, a share of retirement funds, the value of both vehicles. He is also requesting temporary spousal support." I stared at him. "Spousal support?" Evan nodded. "His filing claims that you obstructed his professional advancement, and that your work at Harbor Youth limited the lifestyle he expected to maintain." For a moment, I could not even be angry. Grant had spent years talking about my job as if coordinating youth services made me small, as if helping teenagers find housing, counseling, and a way forward was proof I lacked ambition. Meanwhile, he had never asked why I took certain calls outside, never wondered why I drove across town on weekends, never noticed the ledgers I kept separate, the renovations I managed quietly, the buildings I bought under my maiden name. He had looked at me every day and seen only what his ego allowed him to see. Tessa let out a bitter laugh. "He wants you to support him after he served you divorce papers in front of a camera. He wants leverage," Evan said, "and he is using a familiar narrative to get it." That Simone was passive. that Grant carried the financial weight, that she owes him for his frustration, the cruelty of it settled into something colder. Not heartbreak, clarity. Evan opened his briefcase and removed the legal pad. Before we answer, I need complete disclosure. Every account, every deed, every investment, every source of income, the records he knows about, and the records he does not. My eyes moved toward the hallway that led to my home office, toward the locked blue archive case. For years, I had kept that part of my life quiet because Grant belittled anything he did not understand. I told myself privacy was peace, but peace without truth can become a hiding place. I looked back at Evan. There are things Grant doesn't know, I said. Evan's expression did not change. Then now is the time to show me. I walked past Evan and Tessa without another word. My home office was at the end of the hall. Grant had always called it my little paperwork room, usually with a laugh, usually while asking if I had seen his dry cleaning. He had never asked what I did in there. At the bottom of my desk drawer, beneath old program files from Harbor Youth, was a locked blue archive case. My hands were steady when I opened it. Inside were deed copies, renovation invoices, operating agreements, tax records, bank statements, insurance files, tenant ledgers, and 6 years of careful work. I carried it back to the kitchen and set it in front of Evan. Tessa looked from the case to me. Simone, what is this? My other job, I said. Evan opened the first folder. His eyes moved slowly across the pages. Then he opened another, and another. The silence in that kitchen changed. I own 11 properties. I told them, small apartment buildings, a few mixed-use spaces. Most are renovated and rented. Everything is under Brooks Urban Holdings. Everything is in my maiden name. Tessa stared at me. 11 that I still hold. Grant knew I worked at Harbor Youth. He knew my portion of the household bills. He knew the car I drove and the groceries I bought. What he did not know was that I had spent weekends meeting contractors, that I had learned how to read inspection reports, that I had negotiated leases, supervised repairs, and reinvested rent checks while he was busy telling people I lacked ambition. Evan pulled out statements from my Meridian Reserve account. No commingling. He said quietly, none. Every dollar from my properties went into that account. Every repair, deposit, closing cost, and reinvestment came back out of it. The money that had started it all had never touched our joint accounts. Evan looked up at me at last. Grant is demanding temporary support from a woman who owns an independently funded, income-producing portfolio he apparently never knew existed. The words landed with a strange kind of force, not because I needed anyone to tell me what I had built, but because, for years, I had let Grant's small vision of me become the room I lived in. Tessa covered her mouth. Her eyes filled. You built all of this by yourself? Yes, I said, and for the first time since the gala. I did not feel like the woman holding divorce papers under museum lights. I felt like the woman Grant had never bothered to see. Evan arranged the documents into neat stacks, but he needed more than deeds and account statements. He needed the beginning, so I told them. 6 years earlier, after my grandmother Odessa died, I sat across from Martin Mercer in his office while he explained her will to me, with the kind of precision that made every word feel permanent. Odessa had left me to $175,000, not to Grant and me, to me, separate property, designated in writing. My grandmother had always been careful with money. She wore bright head wraps, smiled gently when people underestimated her, and believed a woman should know exactly where her security lived. She wanted you to have room to build, Martin had told me. At the time, I had no idea what building would mean. Then I took a night course at Harbor Community College, called Building Wealth Through Small Properties. Professor Helena Ortiz stood at the front of a classroom in a practical blazer and taught us about cash flow, repairs, zoning, debt, patience, not shortcuts, patience. I researched for months. I ran numbers until my eyes hurt. I attended inspections on my lunch breaks. Eventually, I bought a weathered fourplex near the ferry line. It was not glamorous. The roof needed work. The hallway smelled like damp plaster. One unit had cabinets that looked older than I was. But I saw what it could become. Grant saw it once and laughed. You're really spending Grandma Odessa's money on that place? He asked. Simone, you work with teenagers. You don't need to play developer. I remember swallowing my answer. That was what I used to do. Swallow answers to keep the peace. I renovated the fourplex anyway. I rented it. Then I used the income, still held separately, to buy the next property. When I left on weekends, Grant assumed I was handling extra harbor youth work. When contractors called, I stepped outside. When I studied spreadsheets at night, he called it my little hobby. He did not notice the business growing because he had already decided I was not the kind of woman who could build one. Tessa shook her head slowly. He never even looked. No, I said. He looked. He just never saw value unless it came with his name on it. Evan tapped the inheritance letter, then the closing records from the first fourplex. This is the chain, he said. The bequest, the education, the acquisition, the reinvestment. Grant had spent years making me feel as if I had no vision. Now his blindness was sitting in blue folders across my kitchen table. Evan did not rush his review. That was one of the things I came to respect about him. He understood that confidence was not the same thing as proof. Proof had to survive a hostile question. So we went through everything. Odessa's bequest had entered my separate account. The down payment for the Fairyline fourplex had come from that same account. The renovation bills had come from it too. The first rental deposits returned there. Then the next down payment. Then the next building. Every acquisition had a trail. Every trail had a document. Evan held up one ledger from the Juniper Row apartments, then matched it to bank records and title documents. Portfolio income stayed separate. He said, "There is no marital deposit history here. No joint account transfers. No contribution from Grant. Not one." I said. Tessa looked toward the window, furious on my behalf. And he was sitting in that house all this time acting like you needed him. Grant had known about my occasional tenant calls. He had seen me leave early for inspections. He had watched me take pictures of properties and talk to plumbers and electricians. But he never asked enough questions to understand. The Alder Pier loft, the Juniper Row apartments, the Lantern District building, to him, they were places I mentioned in passing. Background noise around the life he thought he was directing. Evan finally leaned back in his chair. "Simone, your portfolio is separate property," he said. "It began with a separate inheritance. It was maintained through separate accounts. The income was reinvested separately based on these records. Grant has no legitimate claim to it." I let out a breath I had been holding since the museum. Not because the divorce no longer hurt. It did. But fear had been taking up too much space inside me. Fear that Grant could humiliate me in public, rewrite our marriage online, and then reach into everything I had quietly built for myself. He could not. The very discipline he had mocked as secrecy had protected me. Evan closed the last folder. "His petition is built around a false assumption," he said. "He thinks your paycheck and the Bayview house are the whole picture. They're not," Tessa said. "No," Evan replied. "They are not." Grant had come after what he could see. He had no idea the strongest part of my life had been protected, long before he decided to destroy the marriage. Once Evan confirmed that Grant could not reach my portfolio, his whole posture changed. The calm remained, but now it had an edge. "The Bayview house and the joint accounts will still need to be addressed," he said, "but Grant's demand for your separate holdings is not supportable. Neither is his request for temporary support based on this record." Tessa gave a sharp little laugh. "So he served Simone papers at a gala because he thought he was taking half her life, and he is not even entitled to the part he never knew existed." Evan did not smile. "Possibly less than that," he said. "He asked for our joint financial records. At first, I did not understand why. Then he explained it carefully. If Grant had used marital funds for Leela, for gifts, trips, private expenses, or anything connected to the relationship he was now celebrating online, that spending mattered. It was not just betrayal, it was dissipation. Money taken from a shared life and spent on the person helping him dismantle it. My stomach tightened. I thought of the dinners Grant said were client meetings, the hotel charges he brushed off as broker conferences, the unexplained cash withdrawals, all the moments I had talked myself out of questioning, because I did not want to be called controlling. Evan slid a legal pad toward me. "I want every statement you have. Cards, checking accounts, transfers, receipts. We will identify what belongs in the marital estate, what was spent, and where it went." I looked at the blue archive case, then at the pile of documents from the life Grant had tried to reduce to a salary in a shared house. What happens when he realizes he cannot get what he wants? I asked. Evan's blue-gray eyes held mine. "He may become more aggressive," he said. "He may try to provoke you. He may use Leela, the posts, the public attention. That is why you do not respond emotionally. You preserve evidence. You let us answer with facts. It was ugly, the kind of ugly I had spent years trying to avoid. But avoidance had never made Grant kinder. It had only made him more comfortable taking from me. So I nodded. "Get the records," I said. "All of them." Evan wrote something down, and just like that, the divorce stopped being Grant's performance. It became an investigation. 2 days later, I sat across from Evan at Mercer Property Law while he read Grant's new interim demand letter aloud. Grant wanted a larger share of the Bayview house. He wanted more from the joint accounts. He was still demanding temporary support. The language was polished, but the message underneath it was simple. "Pay me before I make this harder." Evan placed the letter on his desk. "This is pressure. Simone, he is asking for more because he believes the public situation has weakened you." My phone lit up before I could answer. Lila had posted again. She was smiling into the camera, glossy hair over one shoulder, standing beside Grant in what looked like a staged office suite. A banner behind them read Keller Voss Capital. The caption talked about building wealth with the right partner, about leaving behind people who did not understand vision, about finally choosing abundance. They were selling their relationship like a product, and somehow they were selling me as the obstacle they had overcome. I watched the clip once, then I noticed Grant's hand resting at Lila's waist, the expensive watch, the confident grin. The same man who claimed he needed support from me was publicly promoting a luxury property venture with the woman he had humiliated me for. My anger rose hot and immediate, not because I wanted him back, because they were trying to turn cruelty into a brand. My mother called while I was still staring at the screen. "Simone," she said, and I could hear the concern before she said another word. "People from New Hope had been calling me all morning. They saw those posts." "I'm sorry," I said. "Do not apologize for what other people chose to do to you." The words stopped me. My mother had silver locks and warm eyes, but there was steel in her voice when it mattered. "He wants you ashamed," she continued. "He wants you tired enough to give up your peace just to make the noise stop. Don't hand him that victory." I closed my eyes. "He's making me sound small," I whispered. "No, baby," she said. "He is making himself sound loud. Those are not the same thing." Something in me settled. Evan had the letter. I had the posts. And Grant and Lila had made one mistake too many. They had put their ambition on display. Now we had a public trail to follow. The next afternoon, Evan called me back to Mercer Property Law. Priya was waiting beside his conference table, small and still, with 3 thick folders arranged in front of her. She had the kind of eyes that made you feel like she had already noticed what everyone else missed. "I found the affair spending," she said, "not suspected spending." Found. She opened the first folder, restaurant charges, hotel charges, designer purchases, transfers that had left our joint accounts while Grant was telling me we needed to be careful with money. Every page felt like another private lie with a date stamped on it. Then Priya opened the second folder. "This is more serious," she said. Inside was an application for a Bayview equity loan, a loan against the house Grant and I still owned together. My hands went cold before she even finished explaining. The money had not gone toward repairs. It had not gone toward bills. It had not gone toward anything connected to our marriage. A substantial portion had been transferred into Keller Voss Capital, the same venture Grant and Lila were smiling beside on Polstream, the same venture they were calling abundance while he was demanding support from me. I stared at the transfer records. "So he put our home at risk," I said slowly, "to fund a business with her?" Priya's expression did not change. "The records indicate that the loan proceeds moved into an account associated with the venture. We are continuing to trace the full path." Evan leaned forward, his voice low and precise. "Simone, if this application was submitted without your authorization, this is no longer only a difficult divorce. This may be fraud." For a second, I could hear nothing but the blood rushing in my ears. Grant had stood under museum lights and treated me like a woman who had nothing to protect, all while using the life we built as collateral for the life he was trying to build with Lila. Evan turned his laptop toward me. Lila's video was still there, her bright smile, Grant's expensive watch, the Keller Voss Capital banner behind them. "We saved this," Evan said. "Every post, every promotion, every claim about their venture. Publicly available evidence can still be evidence." He downloaded the video, captured the date, and placed it in a new digital file. Then he pulled another document toward him. "Priya will complete the trace. Maya will begin preparing emergency asset protection filings. We will seek to protect the joint accounts, require an accounting, and stop any further damage." Grant thought his divorce demands had put me on my knees. He did not understand what he had just handed us, a trail, and trails lead somewhere. That evening, Priya came to the Bayview house with Evan and Tessa. The dining table disappeared beneath paper, bank ledgers, credit card statements, loan documents, transfer records, receipts from places Grant had told me not to worry about. Tessa stood beside me with her arms folded so tightly across her chest. I could see the anger in her shoulders. Priya placed the equity loan application beside several documents I had signed over the years. Then she pointed to my name. "This signature does not match," she said. I looked down at it. The shape was close enough to fool someone who did not know me. But it was not mine. Not the pressure. Not the curve of the S. Not the way I crossed the B in Brooks. My name had been copied onto a loan against my own home. And the man who did it was still asking the court to make me support him. Priya moved to the next set of records. The loan proceeds had gone through a series of transfers before landing in accounts connected to Keller Voss Capital. From there, money had paid for polished branding, private travel, expensive meals, and the kind of luxury spending Grant had once criticized me for wanting. He had told me I was too cautious, too quiet, too satisfied with a stable life. But while I was managing youth programs by day and maintaining my properties with discipline, Grant had been gambling with our home to finance a fantasy with Leela. Evan's face went still. "We are filing the forgery report," he said. "We are requesting an investigation into the lending fraud, and we are filing emergency relief in the divorce matter." He began listing it calmly: frozen joint accounts, repayment demands, a complete accounting of funds, protection against additional transfers. The words should have frightened me. Instead, they gave shape to something I had been feeling since the gala. The truth was no longer trapped inside my body. It was on the table. Documented. Tessa reached for my hand. "You do not have to be nice about somebody trying to destroy your credit and steal your security." I looked at Evan. "What do you need from me?" "Authorization," he said, "and your willingness to let the evidence speak." Grant had counted on my silence for years. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. I signed the authorization. "File it all," I said. And for the first time since he had placed those papers in my hands at the museum, I did not feel like the person being cornered. I felt like the person holding the receipts. When the last document had been scanned, Evan sat across from me at the dining table and explained the next step. A no-contact protection petition would not be dramatic, he said. It would be practical. Grant communicates through counsel. He does not come to the house. He does not pressure you directly. If he ignores that boundary, there's a record. A record. That phrase mattered to me now. For too long, Grant had made his behavior feel private, debatable, like I was overreacting if I named what he was doing. But a record did not care about his charm. A record did not care how convincingly he could sigh and call me difficult. It only cared about what happened. "I want the boundary," I told Evan. Tessa, sitting beside me with her bold glasses pushed up on her nose, nodded once. "Good. Peace needs paperwork when the wrong person thinks access to you is automatic." My phone buzzed on the table. Leela had posted again. This time, she was filming herself in a glossy office with city views, talking about loyalty and building a future with people who understood courage. Grant appeared behind her for half a second, carrying a folder with the Keller Voss Capital logo across it. She thought she was feeding her audience. She was feeding our file. Evan watched the clip without expression. Then he took screenshots of the post, the caption, the date, the comments, the visible logo, and Grant in the background. "Save the whole thing," he said to Maya over the phone. "Preserve the original link and the captures." Priya added a note to her report. The venture was no longer just a name on a transfer record. It was a public image Grant and Leela had built together, one polished post at a time, and now every polished post had the potential to become proof. I looked around the house I had once tried so hard to keep peaceful. There were files where family photographs used to sit, legal pads where Grant used to leave his keys, evidence replacing denial. It hurt, but it also felt like safety. Evan closed his folder. "From this point forward," he said, "do not take his calls. Do not answer his messages. Send everything to me." I nodded. Grant had wanted a public ending. Now he was about to learn that access to me was no longer part of the story. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the Bayview house alone. I touched the kitchen counter where I had packed lunches before work. I looked at the dining room where Priya had spread proof of Grant's betrayal across the table. There was grief in it, Not grief for Grant. Grief for the version of my life I had kept trying to save, after it was already asking me to disappear inside it. Then I thought about the buildings I had built quietly under my maiden name, the Juniper Row apartments, the Alder Pier loft, the little properties Grant had dismissed as my hobby whenever I tried to talk about them. He never asked enough questions to understand that I had been building a future all along. My phone rang. Grant. For 1 second, I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Simone, he said, and his voice was softer than it had been at the gala. We need to talk like adults. This is getting out of hand. I stood very still. You mean the equity loan? I asked. Silence. Then he exhaled sharply. You do not understand the whole situation. I understand that my name appears on a loan I did not sign. I understand money went to Keller Voss Capital. And I understand you are still demanding support from me. His voice hardened. You are letting Evan turn this into a war. No, that was the oldest trick Grant had. Do the damage, then blame the person who refuses to hide it. You turned it into this when you used our home for your venture. I said, your demand letter is rejected. You speak to my attorney from now on. Simone, don't do this, he said quickly. We can work something out. You have more than I thought. You do not need to make me suffer. There it was, not remorse, calculation. He had not called because he missed me. He had called because he had finally realized I was not the small, dependent woman he had performed for everyone at the museum. You made your choices, I told him. Now you can live with them. Then I ended the call. My hands shook afterward. But I did not call him back. I forwarded the call log in a summary of what he said to Evan. I documented the time, the number, the mention of my assets. The next morning, Evan replied with one sentence. Good. Keep everything. And that was exactly what I intended to do. By the weekend, I understood that strength did not always look like standing alone. Sometimes it looked like letting the right people stand beside you. I told my mother everything, not just about the gala, not just about Leela and the loan. I told her about Odessa's $175, zero bequest, about the separate account I had protected, about the community college class that taught me how to study properties before I ever bought that weathered fourplex near the ferry line, and I told her what those years of quiet work had become. Brooks Urban Holdings. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, her eyes filled with tears. Your grandmother wanted you free, she said, and look what you did with that freedom. Then her expression changed, but nobody gets to take it from you. She called my Aunt Celeste before I could protest. By Sunday afternoon, the Bayview dining room was full again. Evan sat at one end of the table with Maya beside him, organizing disclosure documents into neat stacks. Tessa had brought coffee and enough pastries for an army. My mother sat close to me, and Celeste arrived in elegant glasses and gray braids, carrying a legal pad like she was prepared to cross-examine the whole city. Evan walked everyone through the mediation strategy. We attend, he said, but we do not rush into settlement. We listen, we request disclosures. We test Grant's claims against the records, and Celeste nodded. People who lie in public often assume they can lie in a conference room. Let him talk. My phone lit up again with another Pullstream post from Leela. She was calling a woman who had helped Grant choose courage. Her comments praised her for rescuing him from a supposedly loveless marriage. For a moment, the old humiliation tried to rise in me. Then Tessa looked over my shoulder and scoffed. She can call herself whatever she wants, she said. The documents call it something else. Just then, Evan's phone rang. It was Caleb Rourke. Grant's attorney wanted to schedule mediation at Porter Resolution Center. Evan put the call on speaker long enough for us to hear the careful confidence in Caleb's voice. He still believed his client had leverage. He still believed I would walk into that room ashamed, frightened, and ready to pay for peace. He was wrong. When the call ended, Evan looked at me. This is your decision, he said. I looked around the room. My mother, my aunt, my best friend, the attorney who believed facts could protect me, the paralegal gathering every page of my life into order. Yes, I said, we will mediate, not because I was afraid of Grant, because I was ready to hear what he thought he could still hide. On Monday morning, I went back to Harbor Youth Resource Center. I expected whispers. Instead, I found quiet kindness. My coworkers did not crowd me with questions about the Gala video or Grant's Pullstream campaign. They brought coffee. They covered a meeting when my phone buzzed. They let me do the work I had always loved without making my pain into another public event. Rosa found me after lunch near the supply room. She had supervised me for 7 years. She had seen me before Grant, and she had seen what happened after I started making myself smaller to fit inside his opinions. You know, she said gently, I watched you stop taking up space around the time you got married. The words landed harder than I expected. I thought I was keeping the peace. I admitted. Rose's kind eyes did not move from mine. No, Simone, you were carrying it by yourself. Then she smiled. But I see you coming back. That afternoon, I drove to the Alder Pier loft. A young professional couple had just renewed their lease at a premium rate. They loved the restored brick, the water view, the little details I had spent months getting right. I walked through the unit with my clipboard, checking fixtures, answering questions, making notes for the next phase of maintenance. It was ordinary work. It was mine. Not a hobby. Not a little side interest. Not something Grant had ever had the right to dismiss. Tessa called while I was standing by the loft windows. Turn on Harbor 8 News, she said, right now. I found the broadcast on my phone. Marcus Dale was speaking in that measured anchor voice people use when the truth has become too documented to ignore. Former clients of Voss Venture Coaching were alleging that Leela had accepted large upfront payments for business launch, services she never delivered. One woman described waiting for plans, materials, support, anything until the promises simply stopped. Then the screen changed. Keller Voss Capital. Grant's name appeared beside Lila's. The same luxury venture they had marketed online. The same venture connected to the money taken from our home. For weeks, Leela had presented herself as the woman who had won. Now the polished photos, the staged captions, the expensive smiles, they were sitting beside allegations of people being used and discarded. Evan called before the segment ended. I'm reaching out to the former clients. He said, their accounts may matter. I looked out over the harbor from a property I had bought, restored, and protected without Grant's help for the first time. I understood something clearly. Their image had been built on display. Mine had been built on records, work, and truth was finally catching up with them. By the next morning, Lila's Pullstream page had gone strangely quiet. The posts about luxury, courage, and starting over were disappearing one by one. Comments had turned. People were asking about the coaching clients, about Keller Voss Capital, about the money. Grant called me for times before noon, then twice more. I watched his name light up my screen and let every call go unanswered. He had access to my attorney. He had access to the legal process. What he no longer had was access to me. The day of mediation. Evan and I arrived at Porter Resolution Center just before 10. The building was all glass walls and polished stone, quiet enough to hear your own breathing. Grant was already there with Caleb Rourke. He looked nothing like the man who had stood in the museum atrium with his expensive watch and his rehearsed cruelty. His charcoal suit hung differently now. His face was drawn. His eyes looked hollow. But when he saw me, something familiar flashed across his expression. Expectation, as if I would still walk into a room and become the woman he could intimidate. Evan walked beside me as we took our seats. Elaine Porter, the mediator, introduced herself and laid out the ground rules. Confidentiality, respect, no interruptions, full disclosure, good faith negotiation. Grant barely looked at her. His attention stayed on me. When it was his turn to speak, he cleared his throat. I want this resolved fairly, he said. Simone and I need to be reasonable about dividing what we have. After all those calls, after the news report, after the forged loan and the money trail. He still thought the conversation was about what he could take. I did not answer him. I looked at Evan instead. He opened his folder, and I knew Grant was about to learn how expensive it was to underestimate a woman who had kept every receipt. Caleb began with the version of my life Grant had always preferred. He listed the Bayview house, the joint accounts, the visible savings, the ordinary marital assets he believed were waiting to be divided. Then he stopped. Those are the disclosed marital assets, he said carefully. Evan nodded. Yes, he said, the marital assets. He slid a second set of documents across the conference table. Grant frowned before he even touched them. The first page bore the name Brooks Urban Holdings. Then came property records, titles, purchase histories, renovation ledgers, separate bank trails, records for the Juniper Row apartments, the Alder Pier loft, the Lantern District building, and the rest of the portfolio I had built quietly under my maiden name. Grant's face changed as he turned the pages. What is this? He asked, My separate property, I said. His eyes snapped to mine. You hid this from me. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because even then, with proof sitting in front of him, Grant could only understand my success as something stolen from him. I protected it, I said. There is a difference. Evan explained the origin of the funds. Odessa's to $175. Zero bequests. The separate designation in her estate documents, the Meridian Reserve account. No commingling. No marital contribution. Here's a traceable reinvestment. I told them about the class at Harbor Community College, the weathered fourplex near the ferry line, the research, the repairs, the nights I spent reviewing numbers after work while Grant called my plans a hobby. You never wanted to hear about it, I told him. You decided I had no ambition because you never bothered to look. Grant pushed the papers away. That money should count. He said, we were married. Marriage does not erase documentation. Evan replied. Then Evan opened a different file. The room became very still. He laid out the Bayview equity loan application bearing a signature I had never given. He identified the transfer trail leading to Keller Voss Capital. Then he placed the Bayview account ledgers beside its receipts, card charges, spending tied to Grant and Leela while our marriage was supposedly being protected. Caleb's nervous hands stopped moving. Grant went pale. Evan's voice remained level. My client's separate portfolio is not available for negotiation, he said. Your client's alleged forgery, dissipation of joint funds, and transfer of loan proceeds are a different matter entirely. For one long second, Grant could not speak. The man who had served me divorce papers in front of a museum full of strangers had nothing to say. When the truth arrived in a conference room, Elaine called for a break. Grant stood abruptly and walked out, but I stayed seated, because the power he thought he had taken from me had never belonged to him in the first place. During the break, I stepped into the hallway to breathe. I had barely reached the window at the end of it when Grant followed me. Simone, he said. I kept my back to him for a moment. Then I turned. Without Caleb beside him, without the table, without the performance, he looked smaller. I made mistakes, he said. Leila got in my head. The business got out of control. But we can fix this. We can get counseling. We can start again. For a second, I saw the old pattern trying to rebuild itself. Grant doing harm. Grant calling it confusion. Grant asking me to absorb the consequences so he would not have to. Then his voice shifted. But you have all those buildings. He said, you can't honestly think I should walk away with nothing after all these years. I helped you. I supported you. There it was. The truth beneath the apology. Not me. My portfolio. My grandmother's bequest. My research. My work. My separate account. My years of discipline while he spent joint money on another woman and a fancy business. You supported me. I asked quietly. Grant looked away. You knew I was interested in properties, he said. I just didn't know it was this much. No. I said. You knew enough to belittle it. You just never imagined I would build something without needing your approval. Simone, please. Don't destroy my life over one terrible year. I felt something settle inside me. Not rage, clarity. You did not lose me because of one terrible year. I said, you lost me because you kept showing me who you were. At the gala, in our accounts, in that loan application. And right now, his expression tightened. I'm trying to save our marriage. No, I told him. You are trying me to get access to what was never yours. Then I walked past him and returned to Evan. Grant remained alone in that hallway, facing the consequences he had spent so long trying to hand to someone else. When we returned to the conference room, Caleb looked exhausted. He had reviewed the records, the estate documents, the property titles, the loan application, the account ledgers, and whatever Grant had told him before that morning. Caleb no longer believed it. We are withdrawing any claim to Brooks Urban Holdings, he said. Grant turned toward him sharply. Caleb, it is documented separate property. Caleb said, we are not pursuing it. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. Then Evan placed my accountability counteroffer on the table. Equal division of the actual marital estate. No spousal support. Grant responsible for repayment of the Bayview equity loan. Reimbursement for the joint funds spent on the affair and transferred through Keller Voss Capital. Full accounting. No claim on my separate portfolio. Grant stared at the pages as if they had personally betrayed him. This leaves me with almost nothing, he said. Evan did not raise his voice. It leaves you with what remains after the consequences of your own conduct are addressed. Grant looked at me, searching for sympathy. He found none. Every delay would mean more legal fees, more scrutiny, more questions about the forged signature. The loan proceeds, the account records, and the lending fraud investigation gathering around him. The leverage he had carried into that museum gala had turned to dust. He had wanted me frightened enough to pay for peace. Instead, he was learning that peace has a price when you destroy someone else's trust. Elaine reviewed the framework and directed both sides to continue with the revised terms. Grant said nothing. For once, he had no demand left that the documents could support, and I sat beside Evan, calm and upright, while the life Grant tried to seize was placed exactly where it belonged, with me. 2 days after mediation, Tessa sent me a link with no message attached. Just a headline from the Harbor Ledger. Voss venture coaching under fraud scrutiny as clients' alleged paid services were never delivered. Below it was another line. Grant's name appeared beside Lila's. Keller Voss Capital. The article described former clients who said they had paid Lila substantial fees for startup coaching, launch plans, and business support that never came. It mentioned the Harbor State Consumer Fraud Inquiry. It mentioned the luxury property venture she and Grant had promoted so proudly on Pullstream. And it mentioned questions surrounding the money that had flowed into it. For months, they had used cameras, captions, and staged smiles to make betrayal look glamorous. Now the same kind of public attention was asking where the money went. I stared at my phone for a long time, not because I felt triumphant, because consequences have a sound when they finally arrive. Sometimes it is not a scream. Sometimes it is a notification. Evan called that afternoon. Caleb is withdrawing from the dissolution case. He told me. I closed my eyes. Did Grant fire him? No, Evan said carefully. Caleb says he cannot continue after reviewing the financial disclosures and learning about the lending fraud investigation. Grant had entered that museum gala with a lawyer and a fair partner and a story designed to make me look small. Now Layla was under state scrutiny. Grant was facing questions about a forged application and the Bayview equity loan, and Caleb Rourke wanted his name nowhere near the wreckage. The man who had demanded a share of my future was losing the people willing to stand beside him in the present. But public collapse does not always make desperate people quiet. Sometimes it makes them reach for the last person they think they can still use. That person was me. Lila's first message arrived at 11:43 that night. I need to talk to you. Woman to woman. I almost laughed. There had been no woman-to-woman concern when she filmed Grant serving me divorce papers beneath the museum lights. No sisterhood when she posted that video to Pullstream and let strangers turn my humiliation into entertainment. I did not answer. The next message came 12 minutes later. I didn't know everything he was doing. Then another. He lied to me too. By morning, the messages had changed again. Grant told me you were controlling. He said you had money hidden from him. He said you were trying to ruin both of us. That was how Leela moved through the world. First, she wanted sympathy. Then she wanted distance from the damage. Then she wanted someone else to carry the blame for choices she had made with both eyes open. I took screenshots of every message, the timestamps, the usernames, the sudden pivots from apology to accusation. Then I forwarded them to Evan. His response came back almost immediately. Preserve everything. Do not engage. Block this number. So I did. For one quiet hour. I thought that was the end of it. Then Tessa called. She's trying to reach you on Pullstream, she said. New accounts, comments on old posts. She's tagging people connected to you. My stomach tightened. I blocked each account, saved each attempt, sent those screenshots to Evan too. I had spent too much of my marriage explaining myself to people determined to misunderstand me. I was not doing that anymore. A boundary is not cruel because someone else dislikes it. It is still a boundary, and as I watched another unfamiliar account appear on my screen, I understood something colder. Layla was not going to stop because I had closed the digital doors. She was going to look for another way in. 3 days later, I was reviewing an intake file at Harbor Youth Resource Center when Noah appeared at my office door. His face told me something was wrong before he spoke. Simone, he said quietly, there's a woman at reception asking for you. Security isn't letting her through. I already knew who it was. When I reached the lobby, Darnell stood between Leela and the entrance hall. She looked nothing like the woman from the museum gala. No camera-ready makeup, no glossy hair falling perfectly over one shoulder. Just a messy bun, a wrinkled jacket, and panic sitting plainly across her bare face. The moment she saw me, she rushed toward the security desk. Simone, Please. Darnell held up one hand. Firm, calm. She stopped. Grant left me, she blurted out. He took what was left in the business account and disappeared. He said this was all my fault. For a second, I saw a young woman whose life had cracked open, and I could have felt sorry for her. Then I remembered her standing beside Grant at the gala while he handed me papers meant to break me. I remembered the video, the captions, the messages, the money from the Bayview equity loan flowing into Keller Voss Capital, while my name sat forged on an application I had never seen. You want me to understand how it feels to be abandoned? I asked. Her mouth opened. I didn't know about the loan. She said, I swear, I didn't know. You knew enough. I said, you knew he was married. You knew he was using our life to fund yours. And you knew exactly what you were doing when you turned my pain into content. Tears filled her eyes. He manipulated me. Maybe he did. I said, but manipulation does not erase your choices. The lobby went silent. Leela looked at me as if she had expected heartbreak to purchase her absolution. It could not. Not from me. You need to leave. I told her. Then I turned away. Behind me, Darnell escorted her toward the doors as she called my name one last time. I did not look back. Some people mistake access to your compassion for permission to keep harming you. I was done teaching that lesson twice. That night, an unknown number called my phone against my better judgment. I answered. For a moment, there was only breathing. Then Grant said my name, Simone. I almost hung up immediately. Please, he said. Just listen. His voice sounded thin, frayed around the edges. He told me the lending fraud investigation was getting worse. He said lawyers were expensive. He said he needed proper criminal representation before everything became impossible to fix. Then he said the part that made my hand go cold around my phone. If you help me now, I can fight this. I can get a better outcome. I can pay you back. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and stared at the wall. He was asking me to finance his defense against allegations that he had forged my name, to take a loan against our home. He was asking me to rescue him from the consequences of stealing from me. Grant, I said, do you hear yourself? I know how it sounds. No, I told him. You don't. If you did, you would never have called. He began talking faster. I made mistakes. I admit that. But Leela was involved too. You have resources. You can help me get through this. And then I could make things right. There it was again. The same promise, dressed differently. Give me what I want now. And maybe someday I will become the man I should have been all along. I had believed versions of that promise for too many years. You do not get to use my stability as a life raft after you tried to sink me. I said, Simone, you need to speak to your lawyer, not me. Then I ended the call. I blocked the number before he could call again. After that, I sent Evan a brief email documenting Grant's request and Lila's confrontation at my workplace. No anger, no debate, no opening, just a record. Because I had finally learned that peace is not something you beg harmful people to give you. It is something you protect. After that, the consequences moved with the cold efficiency of paperwork. Lila was charged after the Harbor State Consumer Fraud Inquiry widened around Voss Venture Coaching. The woman who had once curated every angle of her life online was now awaiting sentencing. In Harbor County Detention Center, Grant faced his own charges connected to the Bayview equity loan and the lending fraud investigation. Neither of them could post their way out of documents. Neither of them could charm their way around bank trails, signatures, transfers, and sworn statements. Then Judge Vega issued the emergency orders that finally severed the financial ties Grant had tried to use against me. The Bayview house would be sold. The remaining marital estate would be divided under the revised settlement framework. Grant's portion would be reduced by the repayment obligations, the debt tied to his conduct, and the funds he had drained from our joint life. The day he moved out, I walked through the house alone. Every room carried a version of me that had tried to be easier to love, quieter, less ambitious, less visible. I did not want to take that woman with me. I donated the furniture we had chosen together, the dishes, the framed prints Grant had insisted made us look successful. Tessa helped me pack what was mine. Not much fit in the boxes, but what mattered did. My grandmother's photographs, my records, my plans, my peace. A few weeks later, a bright-eyed young couple came to tour the house. They stood in the kitchen holding hands, imagining birthday dinners and first mornings and all the hopeful things people imagine before life tests them. I watched from the front walk and felt no jealousy, only release. That house had held a marriage. It did not have to hold me anymore. When the sale closed, Tessa sat beside me while I reviewed the final distribution. My lawful share was there. Grant's was almost swallowed by what he owed. He had tried to take my future. Instead, his own choices had consumed the little he had left. And with the house sold, the accounts divided, and the marriage stripped down to its final legal page, there was only one thing left: freedom. The final hearing took less than 20 minutes. That was the strange part. A marriage can take years to wear you down. Years of compromise. Years of swallowing words. Years of wondering whether the smaller version of yourself is the version someone else will finally find acceptable. And then, one morning in Harbor County Family Court, it can end with the judge turning the last page. I sat beside Evan in a quiet courtroom, wearing a cream blouse and the same steady expression I had practiced through every hearing, every demand letter, every lie Grant had tried to make sound reasonable. Across the room, Grant was not there. His public defender had filed the necessary paperwork, but he had not come himself. For a man who once needed an audience for everything, his absence felt almost fitting. Judge Vega reviewed my accountability counteroffer, the asset division, the sale of the Bayview house, and the terms that preserved what had always been mine. Then she looked up. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "the dissolution is granted." Her pen moved across the decree, one signature, one quiet scrape of ink against paper. And just like that, Grant Keller was no longer my husband. I did not cry in the courtroom. I had shed enough tears over a man who mistook my patience for weakness. But when Evan and I stepped outside into the Harbor City sunlight, I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps and let myself breathe. Not carefully, not quietly, fully. I was not somebody's wife anymore. I was Simone Brooks, and I was free. Tessa said I should celebrate. Dinner, champagne, a weekend somewhere expensive. She insisted, standing beside me inside the Calder block with her bold glasses pushed up into her short black bob. The building was old and worn, but I could already see what it could become. Restored brick, bright storefronts at street level, beautiful apartments above them. A place with history, income, and room for other people to begin again. I held up the renovation sketches. "This is my celebration," I told her. She looked around the dusty first floor, then smiled. "Of course it is. My portfolio has survived Grant because I had built it quietly, property by property, record by record, under my own name and from my own resources. But I no longer wanted every good thing I had created to remain hidden behind locked files and private accounts." That afternoon, Evan sent over the formation documents for the Harbor Forward Women's Fund. The name made my throat tighten, not because it reminded me of what Grant had done, because it reminded me of what had protected me. I called my mother from the Calder block and told her what I was planning. "Grandma Odessa's bequest gave me my first real choice," I said. "That $275,000 gave me room to learn, to take the class at Harbor Community College, to buy that first weathered fourplex near the ferry line, to build something nobody could take from me." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother wanted you to have freedom. Simone, look what you're doing with it. Harbor Forward would offer grants, financial education, legal navigation support, and mentorship to women trying to find safety or build independence. Women who needed a first chance, women who needed a way out, women who had been taught to confuse survival with love." Grant had tried to make me feel small in my own life. Instead, I was turning that life into room for other women to stand taller. The Harbor Forward launch reception went onto the calendar before I had time to second-guess myself. Tessa took charge of the visual side immediately. Colors, invitations, the kind of warm, elegant details that made people feel welcomed before anyone had even spoken to them. Evan handled the legal structure, the compliance language, the things that made good intentions strong enough to last. Together, we made a good team. Too good, apparently. One evening, after another planning meeting, Tessa waited until Evan had left before turning toward me with a look I knew too well. "What?" I asked. "He likes you," she said. I laughed once, too quickly. "Tessa, Simone, please. That man looks at you like you are the first sensible thing he has seen all day." I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to pretend I had not noticed the way Evan listened without interrupting, the way he never made my ambition sound inconvenient, the way he asked what I wanted before offering an opinion. But I had spent too long shaping myself around someone else's comfort. I was not ready to rush toward another relationship, simply because loneliness had finally found a softer face. That night, I sat alone in my Seabrook apartment, looking out over the water with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands. The apartment was temporary. My life was not. I had my properties, my work, the Calder Block, Harbor Forward, choices that belonged to me because I had earned them, protected them, and refused to surrender them for the first time in years. I did not need a man to tell me what came next. If love came into my life again, it would have to meet me where I stood. It would have to make room for Simone Brooks, not ask her to disappear. A few days later, Evan came to my Seabrook apartment with an update from the criminal case. Grant had accepted a deferred sentence plea, probation, restitution, community service, formal consequences for the forged loan application, and the money that had been pushed into Keller Voss Capital. No dramatic courtroom speech could have given me more closure than that simple fact. He had finally been required to answer for what he had done, and I did not have to carry it anymore. Evan set the folder down on my kitchen counter. "Your representation is complete," he said carefully. I wanted to make that clear before I said anything else. My heart began to beat differently, not with fear, with recognition. He looked at me with those clear blue-gray eyes. Calm as ever. "The Harbor Forward reception is coming up," he said. "Would you let me take you? Not as your attorney, as a date." For a second, all I could hear was the refrigerator humming behind us. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What would that look like? His smile was small and patient. "Whatever pace you choose. No pressure, no performance, no demand disguised as devotion. Just an invitation." So I said yes. We started slowly. Coffee after meetings, walks along the harbor, dinners where Evan asked about my projects and listened when I answered. He never acted threatened by the life I had built. He seemed genuinely proud of it. Tessa noticed, of course. "You look lighter," she told me one afternoon. Maybe I did. Grant's consequences were no longer my burden to manage, and Evan was not asking me to become less so he could feel like more. For the first time, I understood that a healthy love did not take up all the space in your life. It made room for you to breathe. The night of the Harbor Forward launch reception, I stood outside the venue for a moment before walking in. A waterfront museum gala had once been the place where Grant tried to humiliate me in front of strangers. Now I was stepping into a room filled with people who had come because they believed in what I was building. Evan was beside me, not leading me, not claiming me, just there, inside. Tessa had transformed the space. The Harbor Forward materials were warm and beautiful. I wore a copper evening dress as my mother stood near the entrance, silver locks gleaming, already fighting tears. When it was time to speak, I walked to the podium and looked out at the donors, community leaders, and women who had come hoping this fund might help change their lives. "My grandmother left me an inheritance," I said, "but more than money. She left me an opportunity. I used it to learn. I took a property investment course at Harbor Community College. I bought one small building, then another, and I kept going." The room was silent. I know not every woman begins with that kind of opening. Some are trying to get safe. Some are trying to return to school. Some have a business idea and nobody willing to take them seriously. Harbor Forward exists because financial independence should not be a private privilege. It should be a path more women can reach. I told them about the grants, the classes, the legal navigation support, the mentors who would help women build something solid after life had tried to break them. Then the applause came. Not the cruel noise of phones recording a woman's pain. Real applause, hands raised in support, faces bright with hope. People coming forward to tell me what the mission meant to them. My mother held me tightly afterward. "Odessa would be so proud," she whispered. Across the room, Evan watched me with a quiet smile. And for once, public attention did not feel like a weapon. It felt like purpose. After the last conversation, I stepped outside for air, carrying the sound of that room with me. Outside on the terrace, Harbor City glittered across the water. For a moment, I just stood there with the railing cool beneath my hands, listening to the softened music and conversation drifting through the doors behind me. Evan came out carrying 2 glasses. He handed me one, then smiled. "You did more than meet the goal," he said. "Harbor Forward brought in just under $500,000 tonight." I looked back through the glass at the room Tessa had helped create, at my mother laughing with a donor, at women gathering brochures that might become the first solid step toward safety, education, or a business of their own. Almost $500,000 for grants, classes, legal navigation support. Second chances that did not depend on begging the wrong person for mercy. My throat tightened. Evan leaned beside me, close but never crowding me. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Not. Are you relieved?" "Not. Did we win?" "Happy?" The question settled inside me differently. A year earlier, public attention had meant phones raised while my marriage was turned into somebody else's performance. I had walked out of that museum gala feeling like my life had been shattered in front of strangers. Now the same city glowed below me, and I was standing on a terrace because people believed in a future I had chosen to build. I looked at Evan. "Yes," I said, "I really am." The words surprised me with how true they were. Not happy because Grant had fallen, happy because I had risen. Harbor Forward was real, my work was real, my peace was real, and none of it belonged to the marriage that had tried to make me feel small. 6 months later, I moved into the older pier loft. I had renovated it years earlier as a luxury rental, choosing the fixtures, the warm wood floors, the wide windows facing the harbor. Back then, it had been another careful investment inside Brooks Urban Holdings. Now it was home, not a house shaped around somebody else's moves, not a temporary place where I waited for the next demand, the next message, the next legal document. Mine. One afternoon, I was unpacking books when Harbor 8 News came on in the background. The courthouse reporter stood outside the criminal court, wind moving her auburn hair as she spoke into the camera. "Grant Keller's probation has been revoked," she said. "The court imposed imprisonment after further fraudulent conduct, violated the terms of his deferred sentence plea." I stopped with a book in my hands. For a second, I saw him as he had been at the Maritime Museum atrium. Tailored charcoal suit, expensive watch, that cruel certainty in his face when he thought he was taking control of my life. Then the report showed him being led away, thinner now, his eyes hollow, and I felt nothing like revenge, only distance. My mother had come by to see the loft. She stood near the windows, her silver locks bright in the afternoon light. "Well," she said softly, "that chapter has reached its ending." I placed the book on the shelf. "No," I told her, "his chapter has." She looked at me. "Mine ended a long time ago." That was the truth. Grant's consequences were no longer a wound I had to monitor. They were no longer a story I had to carry. Whatever happened to him after that belonged to the choices he kept making. Evan arrived later with dinner, kissed my cheek, and asked where I wanted the extra plates. Such a small question, such a peaceful life, and standing in the home I had chosen for myself. I understood that Grant no longer had any influence over it at all. My life kept getting fuller. Harbor Forward began awarding grants to women who needed a safer place to start, tuition for a new path, or seed money for an idea they had been told was too small to matter. Some of the first recipients came back months later with businesses of their own and offered to mentor the women who came after them. That was the part that moved me most. Help turning into help. The Calder block renovation was moving forward too. Retail below, rental units above, another solid building restored instead of abandoned. My portfolio continued to grow quietly, carefully, the way it always had, and Tessa had started talking to me about becoming an investment partner in her expanding Harbor House boutique. "You understand the numbers," she told me. "I understand the shells. We'd be dangerous together." I laughed. For once, danger meant possibility. One evening, after 6 months of taking things slowly with Evan, I was at the Alder Pier Loft reviewing foundation reports when he arrived for dinner. He set down a bottle of wine and told me about a pro bono client he had begun helping, a woman named Marina who was facing financial control and needed somebody to explain her options without making her feel ashamed. "Your case changed how I see these situations," he said. It reminded me how much could be hidden behind someone else's confidence. I looked at him across my kitchen island. He had never tried to take credit for what I survived. He had simply used what he learned to help someone else stand up sooner. After dinner, we stood by the windows, Harbor City spread below us in ribbons of light. Evan took my hand. "I love you, Simone," he said. No pressure followed it, no demand for an answer, just the truth, offered gently. For a moment, fear tried to speak first. The old fear, the one that told me love always came with a cost. But Evan had spent months proving otherwise. He loved my work, my boundaries, my ambition, my whole life. He did not want me smaller. He wanted me free, so I squeezed his hand and let myself say it. "I love you too," not because I needed saving, because I finally knew the difference between being possessed and being cherished. A few weeks later, Harbor Forward posted about one of our new grant recipients on Polstream. She was a single mother with a bright smile and a chef jacket, standing in the kitchen where she planned to launch her neighborhood catering business. The caption was simple: "Opportunity should have somewhere to go." I was still looking at the post when my phone rang. The number came from Harbor County Detention Center. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Simone Lilla's voice was smaller than I remembered. No polished confidence. No camera-ready sweetness sharpened into cruelty. Just a woman waiting to be sentenced. "I saw the post," she said, "about that catering grant. About your foundation." I said nothing. She took a breath. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I was greedy. I wanted the attention, the money, the life I thought Grant was offering me. And I helped him hurt you." The words sat between us. There had been a time when Lila had filmed my humiliation and pushed it onto Polstream, as if my pain were content. She had believed public attention made her powerful. Now she was calling me from detention, asking for peace she had never given me. "Grant lied to me too," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but you still made your choices." She began to cry quietly. "I see what you built," she said. "I don't know how you did it." I looked again at the photo of that young caterer, smiling toward a future she had earned the chance to create. "I built it after I stopped giving my life to people who wanted to use it," I said. Layla went silent. Then I said the only thing I had left to give her. "I hope you get the help you need, Layla, but I can't carry this for you." She thanked me in a broken voice. I ended the call, not with hatred, not with forgiveness she had not earned, with closure. Her remorse was hers to live with. My peace was mine to protect. The next morning, I woke before the alarm in the older pier loft. Sunlight poured across the harbor. My coffee machine hummed in the kitchen. On the counter sat plans for the Calder block, foundation reports, and notes from Tessa about Harbor House, a life with room in it. That was still one of the greatest luxuries I knew. By 9, I was at Harbor Forward headquarters. Aliyah met me outside my office with a thick stack of applications pressed to her chest. "These are strong," she said, "really strong." We sat together and began reviewing them. Women seeking certification programs, women trying to leave unstable homes, women with business plans, budgets, and determination, but no safe person willing to invest in them. Each file carried a different story, but I understood the feeling beneath all of them. The need to be taken seriously. The need for a door that opened instead of another person telling you to wait, shrink, or settle. Aliyah looked up from one application. "If the Grants Council approves these, we can fund at least 5 more women this round. At least 5. I thought about what one opportunity had done for me. My grandmother's bequest. A community college course. One weathered fourplex near the ferry line. Patient work. Careful records. The decision not to surrender my future to someone else's ego. Then I looked at the applications again. Put all 5 before the Grants Council. I said, "And let's see if we can do more." Aliyah smiled. Outside my office, Harbor Forward was already moving. Phones ringing, emails arriving. Women walking through the door with plans for lives that had not happened yet. That was the victory. Not simply surviving what tried to break me. Building something that could help other women become harder to break. That evening, Evan and I walked along the Harbor City waterfront with our hands linked between us. The air smelled like salt and rain. Ahead of us, the glass walls of the Harbor City Maritime Museum atrium caught the last gold light of the day. For a moment, I stopped. That was where Grant had tried to make me small. Inside the atrium, beneath ship lanterns and donor smiles, he had placed divorce papers in my hands as if he were handing me a verdict. Lila had stood beside him, beautiful and certain, filming my worst moment for Polstream. I remembered the stop music, the phones lifted around me, the pressure in my chest. I remembered wondering how I would survive being publicly discarded by the man who had spent years making me feel ordinary. Evan looked at me, calm as ever. "You all right?" he asked. I looked through the glass at the place that had once held so much pain. Then my phone buzzed. A Harbor 8 news alert filled the screen. Harbor Forward Women's Fund announces expansion into 3 cities. I read it twice. 3 cities, more grants, more financial education, more legal navigation support, more women with somewhere to turn when the people closest to them tried to make dependence feel inevitable. Evan smiled when he saw it. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. I thought of Odessa and her bright head wraps, telling me that money was not only about what you had, it was about what it allowed you to choose. Her request gave me a beginning. My work gave it shape, and everything Grant tried to take from me had taught me one final truth. No one gets to define your worth because they failed to recognize it. I slipped my phone back into my purse and kept walking, past the museum, past a memory, toward a life that had grown bigger than betrayal, bigger than marriage, bigger than the man who thought humiliating me was the end of my story. It was never the end. I am Simone Brooks, and I build futures that cannot be taken from us.